What is being a historian? Is it just knowing what I know about you? You mine things that really aren't, part of the public discourse, and you keep doing it. Was that what you expected to do, or
You
define what
know,
a historian is?
I love you, bro. Are we starting to record, or are you just
Yeah, man,
we're
we've been recording.
oh,
I'll
we're
just
recording? Okay.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. You bring this up. I've been working on a book actually for almost 15 years now called Conquering Learning Disabilities because I have ADHD and dyslexia. Well, the interesting thing that I found with studying about the history of why this genetic component is in the human race of ADHD and dyslexia, it is superior huntership, if you will. Dyslexia, when you flip things around on the page, that can be problematic for reading and writing. But when you're out in the wild and you're flipping things around and doing the negative of a picture, you can track better, you can know where that animal went and so on because you can see better detail. Also, ADHD allows you to think out of the box because it's not that your attention deficit, it's that you pay attention to everything. Because once again, as a hunter, you're absorbing all inputs. And as a historian, that's something very good. So, to get back to your question, I've written this book and I've talked about how ADHD and dyslexia has helped me with overcoming learning disabilities in the sense that it has helped me see history in new ways that most people do not see. That having this mind of ADHD and dyslexia capabilities, if you will, is when I go into something, I start to see things and patterns and bizarre information that nobody else really saw, whether that be Hitler's Jewish soldiers, about Jews and men of Jews sent to serve the Nazi military, and seeing, there's something larger here that nobody has looked at in the last 70 years. I'm going to do it. So, I start realizing that I find this new story and kind of turn all the prejudices that we bring to World War II and the Holocaust, and I kind of turn it on its head. And also with, Flamethrower, with, Woody Williams, I go into it thinking I'm going to praise this guy and find that only he was the only good guy, in the story, the protagonist that we can really focus on and get behind. And we find that the American hero is actually extremely flawed, and nobody really saw the evidence like I have that show that he's actually a borderline stolen valor, this Medal of Honor recipient from World War II. I really believe that my ADHD and my dyslexia has allowed me as a historian to see areas that other people don't see and kind of turn, you know, prevalent ideas or beliefs that were there beforehand on their head and really reveal the black and white and show the gray of history, if you will. So as a historian, I embrace that.
That has nothing to do with the moxie and absolute courage to go after very sacred topics with unpopular information you might have perceived in such a unique way, which you just described. But there's a certain amount of bravery that, because I know that you have had these obstacles and they're unpopular and you've gotten through them, and you've gotten very noted historians, the most noted, to sign off on it. But
well, eventually, at the beginning, I got a little pushback, but I've kind of always lived my life that I was a contrarian, that I'm an outlier. I love the quote from 12 Angry Men. It takes a great deal of courage to stand alone. Right. And I'm not afraid of that. One of the greatest, there's two great events, I guess, and thank you so much, Steve, for the questions and letting me, talk about my journey.
Yeah,
and some of my triumphs. The two greatest triumphs I had with Hitler's Jewish soldiers was first with Henry Turner, one of the foremost German historians that America has ever produced. He was my mentor and professor at Yale University. Very cantankerous, very hard-headed, very tough professor, not known for his kindness and milk of human kindness, if you will. And he didn't believe in my project at all. He actually discouraged me from looking into Jews and men of Jewish descent. In fact, if I remember the quote from his letter, he said, "Quit chasing after some curious anomalies who will not add anything to our understanding of the Third Reich, and study some serious German history." And he also said I didn't have enough Sitzfleisch, meat in the backside to sit down and write this because I was so hyperactive.
Fleisch.
And he tried to prevent my Rhodes Scholarship, my Henry Fellowship, to go to Cambridge. And luckily, I had some other professors that shot him down. Well, when I finally, brought my book, Hitler's Jewish Soldiers, to the public, and had a lot of professors supporting me and so on, Yale University, under Dean Richard Broadhead at the time, did a celebration party for me. It was a really, like favored son comes back, has done well. They had a lot of my professors there and writing tutors and my deans and so on, telling Bryan Rigg stories as they're going around the table. And Professor Turner was there. And when his turn came around, I was like, oh my God, what is he going to say? And he stood up and he actually had my book with him. And you could tell that he had a lot dog-eared, a lot of pages. He had little sticky notes all through the book. And he says, "I have a confession to make." And I'm like, oh my God, what's he going to say? Because while I was a PhD student, he continually told me, "You're wasting your time." And he said, "I want to tell everybody here that I'm so glad that Bryan Rigg never listened to me. Because had he listened to me, this first rate of piece of scholarship would have never been written." And then he sat back down, and I was like, oh my God, that was one of my crowning glories there for Henry Turner. And anybody who studied Henry Turner knows he was not given to very often to given to, giving compliments and praise. So that was one really big a triumph that I had, that eventually the academic establishment, once they saw the evidence, realized I was onto something, and then they supported me.
What
The
did
other
you
one was
initially
one of the
propose?
greatest
What did you initially
that I
propose?
initially put out there, and they didn't support.
Right.
The other interesting story was with Raoul Hilberg, the god of Holocaust history. I mean, the pioneer, if you will, bringing out the destruction of European Jewry, his landmark book, or 4-volume work, if you will. He was very against what I was doing at the beginning, and he, in the newspapers, because I had never met him, was very derisive of me and didn't think I was going to find very much. Because, to give a little history here, Steve, when I was a graduate student, my wonderful professor, Jonathan Steinberg, said, "Bryan, I have an old student that's at the London Telegraph. We need to get you into the newspapers so people who are still alive will know what research you're doing. And if they have interesting information or interesting, biographical stories to give you, they'll know about you and write you." So I was on the front page of the London Telegraph in December of 1996 with the headline, "A Cambridge student finds out about Hitler's Jewish soldiers." And I got thousands of letters. It worked. But Raoul Hilberg, when he was seeing this from afar, he's like, "I don't know the evidence. I haven't seen any work on this. And why is a graduate student going to the press getting all this brouhaha going on about who he is when he has no credentials, and I don't know the evidence?" So he's very negative about what I found. Well, now fast forward, 2003. I was invited to the conference at Claremont McKenna in California on gray zones, talking about the Holocaust, the issues that it raises, the questions that we debate, and it was going over the famous movie, The Gray Zone, about the Sonderkommandos at Auschwitz. And Raoul Hilberg was there, and I was there as well. And one of my wonderful mentors, Michael Barabaun, who's been very supportive, also negative at first. And then when he read a draft of my book, he was extremely supportive. I have to tell the story about Michael Barabaun here in a second, now that I bring him up. But Michael Barabaun knew about the negativity that Raoul Hilberg felt about my research. So he got us together at dinner, and we ate dinner together. And then for 3 hours after dinner, because Raoul Hilberg was one of your guys. He was a Jewish man of German descent that served in the American military against the Nazis in World War II. And so we're talking and walking around Claremont McKenna, and for ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who don't know about, Steve's great work about face, talking about Jewish and Austrian immigrants, Jewish immigrants who came to America in before World War II and also during World War II, and then ended up in our military and then went back and fought against their countrymen, the Germans. Great work that you did, Steve.
Thank you.
So,
I thought that was a gray zone. And as I was making that, that's when I read your book. And I was like, oh my God.
We got to get together.
I sought you out. But
Yeah.
but one of the things, I spoke to Raoul Hilberg once, and he was it was very negative, but I looked at the phone and I was like on the phone for like 40 minutes with him saying no to me. He somehow minimized his own military service. He told me, look, I threw a hand grenade. I got a combat infantry badge. That's what he told me. He said, and I said, that's why I want to talk to you, but and then Peter Hayes told me, he says, ask him about documents. He loves documents. So I didn't do that. There was
well, you're kind of onto something, because as we were walking around, he was still very skeptical at first, kind of like with your phone call.
right.
And then we got it on the documents about how he had misread some documents and misread some cues he should have followed up on and searched out what they were telling him about numbers of people killed at Sobibor.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't 450,000, it was 600,000 who died there. And he missed that in his book. And as he's talking to me about it, I start telling him about my way of doing research and what I found. And it was clear that he hadn't read my book at this time. But as we talked, he became more enthralled with my work as we talked about documents.
Oh, really?
As I told him what I found. And at the end of that time, he's like, Bryan, at that walk that we had at Claremont McKinney, he's like, Bryan, I was wrong about you. I will read your book, and you are, what did he say? And you are a good, true historian. And I was like, oh my God. So like Henry Turner and then him coming on board. And I talked to him about a year later when he started to suffer from lung cancer, bless his heart. And I called him up and he says, I've read it. Great piece of scholarship. Keep doing it. And so that was a great triumph for me. Now getting the Michael Barabon, I should bring him in with Henry Turner and
before you do
that.
Before you do that though, tell me what is a historian, because in the eyes of a Raoul Hilberg or a Michael Barabon?
Well, I like the phraseology that I've heard some of my mentors at Yale give, like Jeffrey Sammons, who just passed. He was a wonderful man. I also had James Crowley, Paul Kennedy, and they all taught me, Jeffrey Parker, and then Jonathan Steinberg, who was the king of them all, really helped me at Cambridge. History, in many respects, the phraseology I like to use is it's philosophy teaching by examples. And it's giving us real life examples about how to better ourselves. So a historian, in many respects, is a philosopher commenting on human behavior using real life examples instead of just pontificating about how we should live, like a Nietzsche would do, or a Wittgenstein, and so on. And looking at these examples and saying, this is very important for us to focus on because it has changed us, as a species, if you will. And this is what it teaches us of what we should not do and what we should do. So it's almost moral philosophy, if you will, of giving lessons on ethical behavior that a historian is responsible for doing for the reading public. So a historian, in my belief, is a person who brings about real lessons in history that we can get our teeth in and we can understand to help us be a better society, better people, more moral, more ethical, and to learn, hopefully, not to repeat some of the mistakes. I mean, the old adage, if you don't learn history, you will repeat it. And there's a lot of truth to that, just like in our own lives. The mistakes we make, quite often, we don't want to make them again. And a lot of us do learn not to touch that hot stove. not to, hurt this person because, we get hyper focused on our work or whatnot, whether it be our wife or child or whatnot.
Mm.
And we learn by that. And history also helps us as a collective group, I think, to realize what stove not to touch.
So what was, in a nutshell, or what is the story of Hitler's Jewish soldiers? Because obviously this is the second time we're talking about it, but I lost the first copy and we need to retell it. But in a nutshell, and what was it that first of all, how long did it take? What was it that did not sit well with the Michael Berenbaums and the
Raoul
Raoul
Hilberg,
Hilberg, and did David Cesarani sign off on it?
No,
Okay.
no, and I think he's since passed. He was not a very nice person to me. Very great scholar, but pretty nasty individual to me. He's one of the nastiest ones, and I never had the opportunity to have dinner with him or sit down with him, David Cesarani. So Hitler's Jewish soldiers, the way it began was really, random. I was in Germany to learn the language of my ancestors and research my family's background. And while I was in Berlin studying at the Goethe Institute, I asked one of my instructors if there was a film I could watch to improve my German. He in turn asked me, well, what are you interested in? I told him World War II and the Holocaust. He then told me, you got to go see the film Europa, Europa. And in German, it's called Ich war Hitler Jung Solomon. I was the Hitler Youth called Solomon. And this film is about a Jew, Shlomo Perel, who serves in the German military through remarkable circumstances. And then he is sent to a Hitler Youth prep school, and that's how he survives the war. Well, during this film, I watched it with an elderly gentleman who I had actually helped find a seat. And he was giving me commentary all through the film. And after the film, we went to a bar and he told me his story. And he was also of Jewish descent. And after this experience, Steve, I was thinking to myself, man, what are the coincidences that a kid from Texas goes to this film about a Jew served in the Nazi military, only sit next to a Wehrmacht veteran of Jewish descent.
Yeah.
And then a month later, as I was doing genealogical research on my own family's background, I found Jews in my own family branches. I'm like, man, this is not a coincidence. And I started doing research, and before I knew it, these two people who I documented that summer in 1992 turned into 4, and then 4 turned into 20, and then 20 turned into 100 that I was able to find through my research and reading and writing to people who actually were, the protagonists of the film, Shlomo Perel, and the person that I met. I wrote them more, and they started giving me contacts to friends and cousins who also served.
Wow.
And I was like, this is bigger than what I ever thought, and that was the beginning of this. But most of the professors that I met with didn't think there was anything there because they never really had heard of anybody really researching this. Like when I met with Michael Berenbaum in 1995 at Yale University, when he was giving a talk about how he put together the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., I had a lot of documents by then because I had done several years of research up to that point that proved this subject matter. I had even Hitler documents signing off on high-ranking officers who were of Jewish descent who he had actually Aryanized, Aryazierung, documents, crazy term. And I showed him this, and what Berenbaum told me, which was very interesting, he's like, this is fascinating, never heard this before. I don't think you're going to find much because I've never heard about this, but if you get this to a PhD, write me, I want to read it. So now fast forward, we have 7 years later in 2002, I'm working on my PhD at Cambridge. I write Berenbaum. I say, do you remember this conversation? He says, absolutely. I say, may I send you my PhD? He says, absolutely. I sent it to him, and within like a week and a half later, he wrote me up a 3-page glowing review. He was blown away. And on YouTube now, if people want to see the Dateline a documentary called Hidden in Plain Sight. This is about my work, Hitler's Jewish soldiers, and Berenbaum is interviewed in that, and he is asked about this event. He's like, I totally shocked him. So from this humble beginning, in 1992, when I met this guy, Peter Milius, in the theater, who was of Jewish descent, watching the film about Shlomo Perel, who was a Jew and served in the Nazi military, from these two guys, I ended up interviewing over 400 men of Jewish descent who served in the Nazi military. And I documented by name and rank and date of birth and so on over 2,000 men, and looking at discharge records and assimilation rates, birth rates, conversion rates. I conservatively estimate that 60,000 half Jews, as the Nazis called them, and 90,000 quarter Jews, as the Nazis called them, served in the Wehrmacht during World War II. And you have hundreds of line officers, field grade officers, and even you have 22 flag officers, meaning generals or admirals, who served in the Nazi military. Even one of them was a 5-star general, a field marshal. So they weren't, getting back to Henry Turner's phraseology to me, these people were not curious anomalies, but they played very significant roles in the Third Reich, and they help us answer very profound questions about, who could know about the Holocaust? And if you knew about something about the Holocaust, what could you do to fight against it? And what was anti-Semitism like in the military? And why were these guys serving Hitler on the Russian front and on the French front and on the Italian front and so on? And these questions that people struggle with to understand more about the Third Reich and the Holocaust, this story about Hitler's Jewish soldiers really illustrate some of the illuminating answers that help us understand the answers to these questions that we've struggled with for 70 to 80 years now.
Did the Nazis ever, obviously they had their doctrine, they had the Nuremberg laws, they had what and how much so-called Jewish blood takes to define a Jew and then persecute him as such. But when these top officials had to start signing off on however many hundreds or thousands of Mischlinge soldiers or those being of quarter descent, they must have known that their plan had a lot of flaws, because it didn't really pay attention to the complexities of life.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up excellent points, Steve. The one thing that my research, I think, really shows is that when they opened up this Pandora's box, that Jews were bad, they were faced with, how Jewish did you have to be bad? And, at first the non-Aryan paragraph did not work in 1934 because they said basically anybody who had 1 to 4 non-Aryan grandparents was a non-Aryan.
Right.
And all of a sudden, thousands of people in the bureaucracy, in the military, even in the party, came out going, oh my God, I have a Jewish grandmother I never knew I had. And so then they came up with the Nuremberg laws that you astutely bring up. And these laws codified the racial categories that dominated Nazi society at the time. You had full Jews who were more than 50% Jewish or who practiced the Jewish religion. You had half Jews who had 2 Jewish grandparents, quarter Jews who had 1 Jewish grandparent, and then you had the quote unquote Aryans who had 4 Germanic German grandparents. What's interesting here is that for all the Nazi talk about the Jews being a race, they ultimately had to use religious criteria to define that race. Death certificates, birth certificates, marriage certificates throughout Germany always noted a person's religion involved. As a result, the Nazis had to use these documents to document somebody's race instead of looking at their blood, to use a Nazi term, or their big noses and flat feet and dark hair. Just shows you how bankrupt the Nazi racial laws were. Nonetheless, they did dominate the reality of that time. But it also shows you that the Nazis, with the pseudoscience, really didn't know what the hell they were talking about. Now, ultimately, if you got into these percentages, it could be dramatic for how it dictated your life and what you could study and how you could serve and if you're going to be promoted and who you could protect in your family. So, you had to take them very seriously. But a lot of these guys were just the Nazis who were implementing these Nazi racial laws, and the policies that guided them were making it up as they were going. It was total bogus nonsensical way of dealing with people from a legal perspective and an ethical perspective. I mean, we're part of one race, the human race. And, Hitler struggled his whole life worrying about whether he was of Jewish descent or not, because his father was born out of wedlock and most likely was sired by a Jewish family in Graz, when his grandmother, Schickelgruber, was a housemaid, if you will, for that. Kind of like what Spielberg did. I mean, what Schwarzenegger did with his housemaid. He had sex with that Spanish housemaid, had a kid out of wedlock. Well, a lot of very wealthy Jewish families were doing the same thing. I mean, it's interesting in the Nuremberg laws, you have all these laws about race, and then suddenly Hitler added something at the very end that no Aryan chambermaid could work in a Jewish home until she was 45.
Oh my goodness, that's what it meant.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting psychology of what he felt like what happened to his grandmother.
Aside from Hitler, were there any other stories that you know about of people on the level of a Himmler or a Goebbels going out of their way to save Jews that they knew specifically? Are there any?
Well, you have Hitler. I mean, Hitler, rescued Dr. Bloch, who helped his mother when she was suffering from cancer, when he took over Austria in March of 1938 with the Anschluss, and he got him out, of the country. Hitler, it seemed like, had a very soft spot in his heart for his platoon leader, Hugo Gutmann, a Jewish man who was not only his superior, his officer, but was also the guy who was responsible for awarding him the Iron Cross First Class, for an operation of taking over a French unit and surprising them and taking them captive. So Hitler did help a lot of Jews that way. He also would give these Aryanizations, or these Sondergenehmigung, these special clemency documents, or the Deutschblutigkeitserklärungen, or the German blood declarations. So Hitler was giving a lot of these people these awards. Goering helped a lot of people in the Luftwaffe. I mean, Goering was famous for saying, "Wer Jude ist, bestimme ich." Who and who is not a Jew, I'll determine. Taking the phraseology from Kurt Meyer, who was the mayor of Vienna, who was an anti-Semite, but he also was kind of deciding who's a Jew and who's not, who could be in his administration. Himmler talked about having problems with a lot of SS officers underneath him, coming to him with a lot of Jews in their either their families or in their circle of friends, saying, "Hey, yeah, all the Jews are bad, but this guy is an A1 German good guy." So you had a ton of people coming forward showing that they really didn't believe in the racial ideology 100%, because they were making exceptions left and right. Right. Now, granted, when push came to shove and they didn't have that personal contact, they were brutal with implementing the final solution. Right. And most of the people they were killing were Eastern Jews, from Poland and Russia, the Shtetl Jews, the Ostjuden. And it was easy for them to persecute against them because they didn't really have any connection with them. But when you get to the Austrian Jews and the German Jews, there's tons of them that are coming forward to their SS contacts and family members quite often, saying, "Help us out." And these guys trying to make exemptions. So you have a lot of, to answer your question, you have Goering making exceptions. You have, even Heydrich making exceptions. You have Erich von Manstein making exceptions, or trying to push forward people to make the government to consider them and make them make exceptions for them. It was happening all left and right. I mean,
or just letting him get out of the country.
There were several, like Bloch, the Dr. Bloch, that Hitler's mother was under his care. Hitler made sure he got out of the country. And it didn't happen as often as you would like, but there were indeed cases where you had a lot of people helping others get out of the country or get special documents so they could get out of the country themselves, and or getting them basically carte blanche documents, whitewashing their background, cleaning them up, so to speak, and making them Aryans. So yeah, you had that going on all the time. And I was continually shocked at how many of these Nazi leaders always had 5 or 10 guys they were trying to help.
What does that do though?
Not meaning that they were good guys. This is the kind of sad thing. I
I
mean,
know these days you got to watch
Goering
the
and these other guys,
Yeah.
when push came to shove, they were slaughtering hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Jews, and they knew this, and they were horrible human beings. But then on the side, they're helping a few dozens here and there. And then after the war, what do? They say, hey, I'm a good guy. I helped save 24 guys. Never mind the 6 million Jews I helped slaughtered. I really kind of focused on these because they're good. I mean, it's really kind of disgusting, some of the stuff I saw after the war.
I mean, like even a guy like take Otto Oldendorf from the Einsatz group, and I forgot which detachment or A, B, C, or D, but he to be a lawyer, even in pre-Hitler Germany, in a big city, you were going to have Jewish law professors, you were going to have Jews in your class, and that or Jewish professors, all that kind of stuff, and then see a community outside Kiev as being just like Untermenschen and just shooting them all and not being able to associate, one with the other. That's what's so trippy and bizarre and even more horrifying. But the reason I bring that up is, whether we need to know or don't need to know these, few and far between stories of, maybe Nazis helping a Jew emigrate or sparing them incarceration after Kristallnacht. What does it change how does that change our perception towards the greater event? And should it?
Yeah, I mean, it shows you, very good question, Steve. I mean, my research, Hitler Jews Soldiers, just shows that, how difficult it was to implement this racial ideology, and then how bankrupt it was, how it didn't meet up with reality in many respects. But it also shows that, that the questions of who could know about the Holocaust, because a lot of these people who are trying to get exemptions and trying to get special clemency and trying to protect their families by going to either Nazi relatives or Nazi contacts, their behavior shows they didn't really understand that Hitler truly wanted to exterminate all of them, or they wouldn't have been doing that. They would have been trying to get to Switzerland and Sweden and trying to get, false documents to hide, not false documents to show that maybe a grandmother wasn't as Jewish as much as she was, and that they were going to get Aryanized. Because ultimately, had Hitler won the war, many of these half-Jews would have been slaughtered, and quarter Jews would have been selectively sterilized, and in some cases also slaughtered. So they wouldn't have hung around trying to use the bureaucracy to try to not only help themselves, but their families. So it also, this research that I've done just kind of shows you how difficult it was to know about the Holocaust. And if you did know something about it, how you could act on it, how could you prevent it, or how you could have, been able to avoid what was coming down the pipeline for not only your relatives, but you. On average, every man that I documented, half Jew, quarter Jew, and full Jew, who served in the Nazi military, and, I interviewed, over 400, like I mentioned, on average, everyone lost 6 to 7 relatives in the Holocaust. And most of them will tell you they did not know about it until after the war. And one of the most powerful pieces of evidence to show that these people really did not know is that these half-Jews who were serving in the military, they were causing a lot of problems because they were trying to protect their relatives from further persecution in 1940 and 41. Well, Hitler got tired of this. He said, either we're going to have to protect the half-Jews who are serving in the German military and their relatives, or we're going to have to discharge the half-Jews because we can't protect full Jews. Well, now that I think about this, we can't protect full Jews. Discharge the half-Jews. And they were discharged in mass in 41 and 42. 40, 41, and 42, I must say. Well, when these guys came back, they entered the university or they went into the workforce. And in 1944, Hitler saw this huge reservoir of half-Jewish military youth, and he started sending them to forced labor camps to help the war effort.
Including those.
Now, had these men,
I just said including those who served in Barbarossa and some of those other.
Oh, yeah. Guys who were decorated veterans. Now, had these men known about the Holocaust, that their relatives who had been deported before them had been deported most often to their deaths, many of them because they were old, their grandmothers and grandfathers and so on. Why did these very men, if they had known about this, why did they report to their own deportation stations, to Organisation Tot, is what it was called, Organization Tot, forced labor camps, in 1944, had they known about it? Had they truly known what was going on and they get their discharge, I mean, their deportation orders from local Gestapo offices and also labor offices, if they got those reports saying, hey, here's your notice, you got to report at this time to go to your deportation station, to go to your camp. Had they known their relatives died before them, you think they would have done everything they could have to have gone to Switzerland, Sweden, gone underground, or at least taken some weapons with them when they got to the camp, kill as many guards as they possibly could. Well, I found the vast majority, well over 95% of these men, when they were called to report to their deportation stations, they did so. And only when they got to the forced labor camps, which are very different than concentration camps like Dachau and Sachsenhausen, and those are very different from the death camps like Sobibor and Majdanek and Auschwitz. Only when they got to these forced labor camps did they go, oh my God, now I know what happened to Tante Uda and Oma and Opa and so on. And then many of them tried to escape. But that's one of the most telling things about the history that I uncovered, is that how difficult it was to know about the Holocaust, and that most of these guys, even the people who should have known, people of Jewish descent who were losing relatives and were persecuted themselves, didn't think that the nation of Bach and Beethoven and Mozart was going to systematically exterminate them the way that Hitler did.
Well, what about, let's say you're in a unit that's in Riga in 1941, and a lot of German Jews have been sent to be killed in Riga, or was that after 41? Was that after the Wannsee Conference?
No. That was in the Barbarossa and the Einsatzgruppen were behind there. There was a lot of military Wehrmacht units that were there. The Riga killings in that area. In fact, one, Fritz Steinwasser, a friend of mine, he was a quarter Jew. He was in some of those Wehrmacht units that observed the women and children and men having to strip down nude and go to the pits and be shot and killed. And one story that haunts me that Fritz told me, and he became a dear friend.
He watched.
You remember seeing a grandfather and yeah, he saw it. He witnessed it. And he saw this grandson and this grandfather there at this pit being lined up. They're about to be shot. The grandson's 6 or 7. He's just fearful. He sees the dead bodies. People are defecating everywhere. He doesn't know what to do. And the grandfather, with incredible kindness and presence of mind, reaches over to his grandson, hugs him, tells him something in his ear, and they both start laughing. And he looks up at his grandfather with such admiring eyes, just adoring him and loving him. And then the shots ring out. And this story haunts me for obvious reasons. But when I asked Fritz, I'm like, Fritz, you saw this. What were you thinking? He's like, my heart bled at that time for my Jewish relatives and so on. But he says, most of us at this time, he says, and I can honestly say this, the reason why I had a connection to them is because I was Jewish. And I knew more about what was going on because of what had been happening to my uncles and grandfathers, and my grandfather and so on. But he said, most of my comrades felt, he said, not me, but most of them, that these guys were helping partisans, that they were Eastern European types, maybe Jews, maybe not Jews, but that these people needed to be killed to make room for the Lebensraum, the living space for Germans, and that they were not friendly to the Third Reich. They really didn't put 2 and 2 together quite often, many of these guys, that this extermination action that he witnessed was only for Jews. Now, he was able to interpret that because of the persecution. And when you ask him, he's like, why didn't you try to stop it? He's like, man, I'm a corporal. What am I going to do? I go out there and try to intervene in another unit's activities, an SS unit. I'll be shot. I'll be brought up on charges. It wouldn't do anybody any good. And he says, and most of us in my unit, we were in supply unit, but we were right up there on the front. Yes, we witnessed this day because we were coming back to get supplies, but then we went right up to the front and we're being brutalized because we're fighting the Soviets. Every day, one or two of my comrades are getting their heads blown off or being killed or shot. And you don't have a lot of time for self-reflection when you're dealing with self-preservation. So it was a very interesting dialogue that I had with him, about what could you know? What did you witness? Many of these guys were witnessing it, but a lot of times they didn't understand it. I mean, even in Christopher Browning's landmark book, Ordinary Men, he shows a lot of these guys didn't really understand what was going on until weeks, if not months, in the units that they were in, that they were actually part of a unit that their main job was to exterminate Jews.
Yeah.
And many of them who couldn't handle it asked permission to release themselves from the duty, and they were given that as well. So we see that, the Third Reich in many respects is very black, very gray. It's not black and white. And my history really shows just how difficult it was to do what we today in moral society would have hoped most Germans would have done. This is not right, Hitler. We do not support this. Why are you doing this? And it just shows you that when you're in here's my speech impediment coming through, totalitarian regime that controls the information and brutalizes people, that they can control the mindsets of a lot of these people, that they're doing crimes that they don't really truly understand until after the fact. And this is why we should really support and praise and treasure a democracy like we have, and freedom of speech and freedom of the press.
When did you start to realize that you had, and I'm segueing over to the rescue of Rabbi Schneerson, because that became its own book. And I'm sure you came across this particular story while researching everything else. Is that how it happened?
Yeah. In 1994, as I was doing research on this work about Jews and men of Jewish descent who served in the Nazi military, I came across an interesting book by Alan Abrams called Special Treatment. And I had also come across some information from Werner Goldberg, who had talked about this as well, and some of the publications that he had in Germany. Werner Goldberg was a half Jew, was in the Berlin Senate, and it helped with a lot of publications of Jewish Christian solidarity and understanding in Germany after World War II. Mm-hmm. And his publications and writings, plus Abrams' writings, talked about a German officer of Jewish descent, Major Ernst Bloch, who rescued this rabbi named Rabbi Joseph Isaac Schneerson of Chabad, of the Lubavitchers. And so I came across and I was like, that's kind of interesting. I wonder how that happened. That doesn't make sense. Why was a Secret Service German officer rescuing a high-ranking rabbi, if you will? And so I, collected information on this because I was primarily in 1994-95 just very interested in focusing on just finding as many people of Jewish descent that I possibly could who served in the Nazi military. Mm-hmm. Well, when I came back to Yale to begin my senior year in 1995, and I sat down with Paula Hyman, the head of Jewish Studies at Yale University, and I told her I'd come across this a little bit. She's like, Brian, you should focus on that. And I was like, well, it's interesting. This German officer, the reason why he rescued Rebbe Schneerson is because somebody in the White House and the State Department had written the Secret Service and his commander, Admiral Canaris, and had asked that the German military in 39 and 40 rescue this rabbi. So I was like, there has to be stuff about this in the National Archives. So as an undergrad, I took a train from New Haven, Connecticut, Yale, down to Washington, D.C., went to College Park, and also went to Pennsylvania Avenue, where the archive was at that time. It's now been all moved to College Park, Maryland. And I found the documents about this rescue from the American point of view. And then I found actually Major Ernst Bloch's children in Germany. And I wrote a senior essay with Paula Hyman, and she said, "You're the first undergraduate student I've ever had that's gone to the National Archives to write an undergraduate paper." And I really found, Steve, fascinating information here about a remarkable rescue of World War II. And so when I went off to Cambridge on my Rhodes-Henry Fellowship that I got from Yale University to study at Cambridge University under the phenomenal professor Jonathan Steinberg, when I was talking to him about my project about Jews and men of Jewish descent in the Nazi military, he said, "Well, before you can do a PhD on this, which you should do, you got to have a master's. Cambridge doesn't really allow you to kind of skip that step." And I told him about this essay that I had written for Paul Hyman. And he said, "There's more there. We should do that for your master's." So I started finding more and more evidence, thousands, tens of thousands of pages of documents about this rescue. And I wrote it up for my master's. Then it later became my second book, Rescued from the Reich. Mm-hmm. And then when my Rescued from the Reich came out in 2004 with Yale University Press, I had a lot of people who were children or nieces and nephews or friends of a lot of the main characters, the Nazis and Americans, who got in touch with me and gave me even more documents, like another 10,000 pages worth of documents. And so I wrote a second edition called The Rabbi Saved by Hitler's Soldiers, incorporating all this new information. Wow. So yeah, I came across this subject matter while doing research for Hitler's Jewish soldiers about one of the most remarkable, and according to Michael Barabbaum, one of the foremost Holocaust historians in the world, probably the most remarkable rescue of World War II.
Remarkable. Well, it really was, especially, in the whole context of Chabad, because he came and then his son-in-law took over, who became, the really well-known Lubavitcher Rebbe. Yeah. And it's these stories really are what I like to call the gift that keeps giving, because I'm always grateful that I'm alive at a time where a lot of new information has come to light, or as Michael Berenbaum would say, look, when new information comes along, it revises the margins, it revises the margins of the history. And he does it in such when the Jews revolted at Treblinka, it's that same kind of intensity. But it does, I feel grateful that we are, the people are bringing new information, whereas in the Big Lebowski, new shit's coming to light, And I say that because I always think the more dimensions possible, but then that also brings you to an area that I just brought up earlier, which also led to you talking about the would-be stolen valor. Tell me how that came about too, and then we could just talk about anything. I just wanted to touch on all three.
Hey, why, thanks. So my fifth book, Flamethrower, is about Iwo Jima, the Battle of Guam. Iwo Jima, by the way, right now we have the 76th commemoration of this battle that it took place, just a few weeks ago, starting February 19th.
Oh yeah.
And so this book focuses, Flamethrower, on the Battle of Iwo Jima, the Battle of Guam, Japan's Holocaust, the 3rd Marine Division that served on Iwo Jima and also Guam. And I use a man's life, Woody Williams, who's a Medal of Honor recipient, the highest medal you can get for valor in the American military. I use his life to talk about these larger themes of World War II and the strategic, operational, as well as tactical levels of battle. And I kind of like to say my work is like the band of brothers for the Marine Corps, because I focus on this unit and I take them through the Pacific, and you get to know all these different characters, one of them being Woody Williams. Now, the way I met Woody Williams is I was on the island of Iwo Jima in 2015 for the 70th commemoration of that battle. I was there with my 12-year-old son.
Wow.
As a Marine, I wanted to kind of touch Mecca. I wanted to meet other veterans. I wanted to share this experience with my son. And I wasn't thinking, Steve, necessarily I was going to write a story or write a history about this, but I met Woody Williams, a Medal of Honor recipient who's still alive at 97 years old. And when I found out nobody had written about his story, or that he hadn't written about it, I was like, hey, I'm a Marine, you're a Marine, I'm a trained historian. We should maybe try to do something and tell the story again to commemorate all these men and what they did on this island. Now, for those of you who don't know the significance of the Medal of Honor, the Medal of Honor, quite often is given for incredible heroic acts beyond the call of duty. And most often they're done, in a way that the person, when they get the award, they're getting it posthumously. They died. So on Iwo Jima, by way of illustration, there was 80,000 men who rotated on and off the island who were combat troops. 27 of those guys got the Medal of Honor. 14 of them died. Only 13 survived. So that there's one still alive today from that battle is remarkable. And I was talking to him. I mean, also put it into context, almost 700,000 Marines served in World War II. 84 got the Medal of Honor. And a little over 50 of them died doing their acts to get the award. So it's a very small fraternity to begin with. And it's even a smaller fraternity of the guys who survived the acts that they did that got them the award. So to meet Woody Williams, who's one of the biggest legends in the Marine Corps right now, ships are being named after him, schools being named after him, hospitals being named after him, streets being named after him. Trump had him all over the place, flying on, Air Force One. He was remarkable that nobody's actually written about him, I thought, with all this brouhaha surrounding him. So we decided to, start thinking about a project together. And I also said, well, I'm going to do a project on the side. I'm going to bring out all this other history about your unit and whatnot. And as I started going into his story and learning about his past, I found that he was borderline stolen valor.
Now, what's that?
So stolen valor is when a person comes forward and promotes himself as having done things that he did not do militarily, and that he benefited from doing things. He benefited by having VA benefits or having a certain status in society by lying. That's the Stolen Valor Act. Now, for a while, if you went around after it came out with Judge Burkett's book, Stolen Valor, that came out in 2002, that implemented, I think, the legislation, I think in 2005 and 2006, that said if you ever misrepresent yourself in the public eye as having a rank you didn't have or serving in the military when you didn't, it was a crime. Then Obama ratified it and said only when you benefit financially from the governmental agencies, like the VA or the military giving you a pension, then it is a violation. Well, Woody shot his mouth off in such a way in World War II after he survived Iwo Jima that the story took on a life of its own, and it became bigger than what it was. I mean, his sea tale went from describing a 4-pound bass to turning into a 20-pound bass, elaborating what he was doing. He had a Napoleon complex. He was a small guy. He was fabricating stories all over the place. This is kind of his MO.
You didn't know this yet?
No, not at all. For 2 years, Steve, I was so enamored with him because I'm a Marine Corps officer myself. I swallowed whole his story for the first couple of years, and I had total falsehoods and nonsense in my book for a few years until things started to fall apart. And before you knew it, it's just like a house of cards. When you pulled one or two out, then all of a sudden, bang, I found that he lied about so many things in his life. And so when I found this out, I had done already a tremendous amount of research. And I basically told him, hey, we're not working together anymore. You're not a guy that I respect, and you're not honorable, and you've been lying. You need to tell the truth. And instead of him coming forward and telling me why he had lied or why he had fabricated things. He filed a 5th District federal lawsuit in West Virginia against me, and he's been trying to prevent the publication of this book. It's been now in print for a year, and he's been trying to prevent it from continuing on. He's been unsuccessful because it's a violation of our constitutional rights, our First Amendment. But he's still suing me, saying that I've caused him damages. But when we ask, okay, what are the damages? If it's slander, tell us what's wrong with the book. He can't tell us anything.
Right.
It's been the biggest fight I've had on my hands as an academic ever, Steve. That this guy can actually file a lawsuit and hold me hostage without ever having claimed damages. It's kind of a weakness in our legal system, if you will.
Now, what happened? Did you come across some morning reports or after action reports or citations that
Well, what first happened was very interesting. Woody had a guy by the name of Lefty Lee, who was a comrade of his, who was still alive. I was on the island of Guam and Iwo Jima with both these men. And Lefty Lee was supposedly one of the guys that was in the protection group that Woody had to help support him and protect him when he got into position to take out the pillboxes that he destroyed with his flamethrower on Iwo Jima. So Lefty has these elaborate stories of him with his bar gun killing Japanese and protecting Woody left and right. Well, when I was documenting Lefty's story, I started to realize, hey, Lefty, you were blown up, according to him, on Iwo Jima, and you didn't get that Purple Heart from the personnel file papers that you've given me. You know, he was giving me all his documents. And also, if you were screening for Woody and protecting him this day, the type of actions you were doing that Woody can verify is minimum Bronze Star with a Valor device, V device, Valor device, worthy. We should get that for you.
Well, after getting the Medal of Honor?
Huh?
After the Medal of Honor.
Yeah, after the Medal of Honor. Well, this is for Lefty, not for Woody. This is to get recognition for Lefty for helping Woody get the Medal of Honor.
Maybe a Silver Star if you want to be nice.
Exactly. We even thought about that. So we put together a package for him. We actually put it all the way up to Senator Al Franken, because he's in Minnesota.
Right.
His office, the congressman in Minnesota. We got the VFW of Minnesota to sign off on it. We got his local mayor in Winona, Minnesota, to sign off on it. And they were asking me, you know what, we need to get more evidence for the Purple Heart. And I was like, well, this is very easy. I'll just go to the National Archives and we'll find the deck logs of the ship that took him after he got blown up. And it'll just say, okay, shrapnel in the leg, a concussion, whatever. And we'll have those deck logs. And I'll say, hey, here's the deck logs. Definitely he warrants a Purple Heart. And it'll show that what unit he was in and whatnot. Well, what I found is that he was never on the island with Woody during the day that Woody did all his acts. In fact, when he hit the island on the night, on the 21st of February.
After D-Day.
After D-Day, the third bar didn't come on until the 21st. They were in reserve. The 4th and the 5th Marine Divisions hit the beach. They were taking such heavy casualties that the command of the Marines at that time, General Schmidt, who was in charge of the 5th Amphibious Corps, decided to deploy the 3rd Marine Division under General Erskine and get them on the island. So they didn't land until the 21st anyway. Now, Woody, the events that led to his Medal of Honor were done on the 23rd of February. So when Lefty hit the beach on the 21st, he cracked up, psychoneurosis. I did find the deck logs, but they weren't for being blown up and protecting Woody. They were for psychoneurosis several days before Woody did all his events. Now, this is what's interesting. Woody has had Lefty go to several events throughout their lives and has Lefty get up and talk all about the events he saw Woody do. And Woody would say, I'm not going to talk until the man in this room that saved my life and protected me gets up here and ties the Medal of Honor around my neck. Lefty gets up, talks all about what he saw Woody do, tie the medal around his neck, hoopla, standing ovations, people in tears and whatnot. And then Woody gives his story. Well, when I sat down with Lefty And at this time, I'd already found a lot of problems with Woody's testimony. Not only the testimony he gives today, but the times he was getting interviews in 45, 56, and 66 when he was blowing his mouth off and making up stuff. And I already found a lot of things, but I was at the time trying to rectify what Woody maybe remembers today, what he remembered, months after the event, 10 years after the event, 20 years after the event. But I was starting to unravel, his story was starting to unravel. And when I asked Lefty, when I finally got him to come clean that he had made up all this story, and we had to remove his medal package from the senator, from the congressman, even from the awards board at the Marine Corps that they were reviewing it. It was embarrassing.
You must have been
out. Oh, and the World War II Museum was about to do a 2-week historical documentary tour of the Pacific with both Woody and Lefty.
Right.
Tommy Lofton, who was in charge of this, was about to do this. I called him up, said, "Don't do this. You're going to look stupid." And then he did some research and found some documents, and he found indeed that Lefty was not there. So anyway, I sat down with Lefty and I said, "Lefty, you have all this incredible detail, all these stories you've been telling me. I have 40 pages in my book, and you have from you, and you have articles from you talking about everything you saw Woody did." And Woody says, you saw what he did. Where did you get what you saw? He's like, "Well, I started reading those articles from the 40s that Woody was giving." And what's interesting is I was at this time able to prove that most of the stuff in those articles was made up information by Woody. So Woody was letting Lefty propagate his lies, making it truth based on original stories he gave that were fabricated.
But in those 3 days, to have that story corroborated by somebody for him to get the Medal of Honor in the first place, like that's a really good spin job in a very short period of time. And is that what happened?
I mean, well, Lefty wasn't used at the time. That would have been a kind of interesting, even a further collaboration, a conspiracy, if you will, that they could have done back then. How it actually happened was the following. Woody was like one of a dozen guys out of almost 300 guys that hit his beach, hit the Yellow Beach with a company. He was in Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 21st Marines Regiment, under the 3rd Marine Division. When he walked off that island, he was one of like 12 guys to walk off, or 10 guys. I mean, it's kind of hard to find the exact numbers, but it was a very small number of guys who were the original contingent who were still combat effective. Now, a lot of the guys survived because they got wounded, but most of them had been removed from the island. Many of them had severe wounds. So when he gets back to Guam, he's one of the few guys that survived. And a few people hear that he took out some pillboxes with a flamethrower, which he did. And he starts shooting his mouth off. And he probably took out 2, maybe 3 pillboxes, killed between maybe 4 or 8 Japanese. Good day on Iwo, but that was a common day on Iwo. A lot of guys were doing that. There was 5,000 pillboxes, bunkers, and reinforced caves on Iwo Jima. Taking out bunkers and caves was a common, activity all Marines were doing. So when he gets back to Guam, he starts making up stories that he took out 7 pillboxes, and one alone had 21 dead Japanese in it. And this took on a life of its own, and it eventually made its way into the company commander's duty hut. He's like, "Man, we got to write this guy up for a Medal of Honor." His name was Donald Beck. So he did the reverse scientific method procedure. He wrote up what he had heard as the sample citation for a Medal of Honor and as the evidence for Woody's gallantry. And then he went out and found witnesses to support it. Well, the witnesses at best, like I was telling you, they say, "Well, yeah, Woody took out 1 pillbox." Another one says, "Man, he took out maybe 2, maybe 3. No, I think maybe 1. But the evidence that was collected by 7 guys only proves about half of what Woody was shooting his mouth off about. Mm-hmm. Now, Woody doesn't know his company commander is written him up for this and going out and finding evidence.
Right.
But Woody starts giving interviews at this time, and the only person who is on record saying I killed 21 in one pillbox, giving people the extrapolation, like, hey, if he killed one in one pillbox, 21 guys, and he took out 7 pillboxes, he must have killed 150 guys. I mean, he's a bad A, he's, incredible warrior. He knew what he was doing. Now, he wasn't doing it for the Medal of Honor.
Right.
Huh?
No, I was just going to say.
Yeah, he wasn't doing it for the Medal of Honor. Yeah. But he was just doing it because he was trying to get street cred in his unit. He was called Zippo Head, the lighter, Zippo, for cigarette. He was a hot head. He was in fights all the time. People really didn't like him very much. And so with the new replacements coming in, he was trying to get this credibility in front of them by making the story up. The unintended consequences is that this eventually makes it up through the chain of command. Now, this is what's interesting. The faulty evidence that Beck gathers and the citation he put together and the endorsement letter he did for the company to send up to Regiment, Beck hasn't seen his wife in 2 years and his 2-year-old son. And he only has a couple of days to put this together. He kind of throws it together, and then he goes stateside and sees his wife, and he doesn't return to this unit, returns to a different unit. He's getting ready for the invasion of Japan.
Right.
He throws it up the chain of command, and the regiment, kind of signs off on it, makes some mistakes. They're not really paying attention to it. But, hey, yeah, Woody sounds like a good guy, a tough warrior. We'll put it up. Goes from regiment, goes to division, gets signed off at division, goes up to 5th Amphibious Corps, which was in charge of those 3 divisions, the 4th, 5th, and 3rd Division that hit Iwo Jima by General Schmidt. And then it was sent to Fleet Marine Force, the 6 divisions of the Marine Corps, 1st Division through 6th Division. And this gets to Roy S. Geiger. And he is a stickler for facts. He's a bureaucrat. And he's a good man. He's a good Marine. He's fair, but he wants the evidence. So he actually reads the package, and his board reads the package. At this level, you have about 5 guys that are colonels or lieutenant colonels that are part of the awards board that is attached to the general of the Fleet Marine Force to make sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. Well, the board and he realized, oh my God, here's the evidence, and it doesn't even match the citation, the sample citation, or the endorsement letter. And then they see that the platoon leader that was in charge of Woody, his name was Howard Chambers, had survived, and he was there the whole day. They're like, well, all these different Marines who are giving their perspective from different angles only support half of what Woody supposedly did. But the platoon leader who was in charge of this whole action that day, that took out 32 positions and probably killed 150 Japanese, he's alive in Virginia at Fort Eustis. We'll write him. And if he can verify what's in the sample citation and in the endorsement letter and kind of bring all these other pieces of evidence together into one collective story, then I'll sign off on it. So General Geiger writes Admiral Nimitz, who's in charge of the Fleet Marine Force, because he's the commander of all Pacific, activity with the Marines and Navy. He talks to Chester Nimitz and says, this is what I found. You looked at the evidence. You had your board look at it. Don't you see the same thing? Admiral Nimitz, 5-star admiral, says, yes, you're right, Geiger. Get that evidence. So they write the lieutenant, Woody's lieutenant, Howard Chambers, and he refuses the answer. They write him again saying, and Geiger the second time around is really irritated. He's like, Lieutenant, you're a lieutenant. I'm a 3-star general.
Right.
Answer my, a lot of curse words right there, letter. Now, Chambers refuses to do so. Now, by the time this bureaucracy going back and forth with all the letter writing at the time, the war is over. And Truman is president. And he wants to do a big shindig at the Rose Garden in October of 1945 to award the Medal of Honor to worthy recipients. As we all know, with Obama and Bush and Trump, awarding somebody the Medal of Honor in the White House or the Rose Garden is a big deal. and it's a bipartisan event, and it's a great thing politically for a president to do. So Truman says to his Secretary of the Navy, I want a live Medal of Honor recipients. I don't want dead ones. I want alive ones. And there were 3 outstanding guys, one of them being Woody. So Forrestal goes to Geiger and says, get this done. And Geiger says, under no circumstances approve Woody. There is not the evidence. And he actually wrote the Commandant of the Marine Corps and said the same thing. And the Commandant said, we're not doing it.
This is what you discovered. You discovered these letters.
I discovered all these documents. In fact, I actually have copies of the documents in my book, Flamethrower.
Wow.
And so when this is going on, I'm just going to shut the door because my kids just came in. Sorry,
okay.
Steve.
No, don't worry.
So you know, Forrestal is kind of in a pickle here because President Truman's given him this mandate and he's having a problem with these guys. So he talks to Admiral Haler, who's actually one of the last gatekeepers, if you will, for Medal of Honor at this time. He was in charge of the Navy Department of Awards and Decorations. Mm-hmm. And nobody gets any awards with him. And he actually got from Secretary of the Navy, Forrestal, carte blanche that he could take any medal package, whether it be Silver Star, Bronze Star, Navy Cross, or Medal of Honor, and he could upgrade it or downgrade it with a stroke of his pen. So he's getting pressure from Forrestal to get this case done. Either get him a live Medal of Honor recipient with Woody Williams, or find somebody else. So Haler remarkably takes this away from Admiral Nimitz and General Geiger and pushes it through and gets Admiral Ernst King's signature and fast tracks it to the White House. It was done politically. Now, to be fair to these guys, I think they felt the evidence would eventually come in. Mm-hmm. Geiger smelled a rat. He knew there was something wrong with the evidence, but they hadn't come to the conclusion that history now has shown us that they were right to feel something was wrong with this because Woody made it up. As Commandant Krulak, Charles Krulak, right, the 31st Commandant of the Marine Corps, when he reviewed this evidence with me, he's like, Woody should have gotten a Silver Star at best Navy Cross with this package. But we see that Woody made this whole thing up. So when I found this out, and Woody knows this, because this is what's really interesting, Steve. This is what you probably didn't know.
I didn't know
that you wanted to have, but this is what you wanted to have. So Woody, after the war, he does. This was fascinating. I got to back up, Steve. So Haler takes it away from Nimitz and Geiger. He fast tracks it to Nimitz, but they have to admit the evidence is faulty. So they take the sample citation that Woody's company commander wrote up, writing 7 pillboxes, 21 dead Japanese in one of the pillbox, and they have to take all that evidence out because it's not proven. The citation that finally got approved is very nuanced. Woody takes out a few pillboxes and moves the front forward. Compared to other Medal of Honor recipients citations, which I document in my book, very unspecific about what he did. So they had to admit there was problems because they changed up the documentation.
This is 75 years of living with a certain narrative, and it's been like that, and it's even in the public record. There must have been some part of you saying, but then again, I'm not you. I mean, I've been involved in something where I found out from morning reports it's a famous person wasn't a D-Day lander. And I've been so upset about that for such a long time. And I tried to stop a big nationally televised thing. Now, in retrospect, I feel just bad about the whole thing. Like, at what point were you like having to see this through? Was it because you're a historian? Is that the Hippocratic oath or something?
Well, yeah, as I was looking at all this, we as historians, you and I both, can
That's very kind of you.
Well, and my fellow searcher for truth and friend, as you are.
I am. Thank you.
We are responsible for helping the next generation be better. We want that for our children. We don't want that for our society. We want that for our military. And if we don't tell the truth about the past, we defame and disgrace the sacrifice that those before us made, whether it be small, of our grandmothers and parents that they sacrificed to give us good education, or whether it be those poor young boys that sacrificed for our freedoms on Iwo Jima fighting fascist warmongers like the Imperial Japanese. So as I found out that Woody had benefited, I mean, he's gotten probably over $1 million tax free for the medal, because when you get the medal, you get a stipend every month tax free from the government. And he gets all this fanfare and so on. When I realized that he was in many respects, a charlatan, I was irritated. Now, did I want him to be larger than what he was? Absolutely. Did I think he was going to be larger than what he was? Absolutely. But it kind of reminds me of a Lessing's phrase from Nathan the Wise. He said, "People are rarely what they seem, and rarely are they better." And Woody was much worse than what you could ever imagine of what's been promoted out there in the public eye. And this is what's very interesting. I mean, when he did a federal lawsuit against me because he's trying to shut me up, he's violating the U.S. Constitution that he swore an oath to protect.
Right.
So when he started doing this stuff and he made me into an enemy, I was very disappointed in him. He is indeed a hero in many respects of what he saw and did on Guam and Iwo Jima, no doubt. Anybody that fought on Iwo Jima, especially for 30 days, I can't imagine what they went through and saw. But he's a very flawed hero, and we need to be honest about that if we want to make better heroes in the future. So I did feel some regret. I had even my own brother tell me, "Don't bring this out," and I thought that was a cowardly, because he is also a Marine.
Right.
I'm like, how dare you say that when we were raised by our grandmother Edna Davidson to always tell the truth. And you're a coward putting a tail between your legs. That's not what I want to see from my older brother.
Right.
So I went full force forward, damn the torpedoes, if you will. And now getting back to Woody, for the first 21 years, from 45 to 66, when you look at the interviews I've been able to find, he has perfect recollection. He is talking about this and adding to it and making it bigger and bigger. And he's getting godlike status within West Virginia. I mean, he's one of the most famous West Virginians, besides probably Chuck Yeager, that state's produced. So in 1966, he brings out this large article with Man's Magazine. And he talks in incredible detail about what he did. Now, I'm not able to really point directly to hardcore evidence of a telephone call or a letter or a personal meeting, because the men who I feel did this are dead and I can't interview them. I talked to their children.
Right.
But I am very convinced that when that article came out in 66, many of his comrades called him up. And according to one guy, he heard the conversation of his father. And he basically said this to Woody. He said, "I can kick your backside because I did it back in 45. And if you ever bring out an article like this again, I'm going to come out to West Virginia and I'm going to do it again to you."
So these were guys you knew.
Yeah.
You knew via
these are his comrades.
Yeah.
And after 66, what's interesting is Woody has this weird way of describing the events that day, of saying, "You know what, it's so traumatic and there's so much amnesia and I've tried to avoid it." And he doesn't talk about very much stuff except for two things that made it into the citation. One is that he crawled up on a pillbox and flamed it from the inside out through a vent. And that's actually documented by one of his witnesses. So that did happen. And then he talks about another event that did make it into a citation of him flaming a little bonsai charge.
Mm-hmm.
But what's interesting is that bonsai charge, when you really analyze it, it's something that he made up and got into the historical record. But he actually cites these two events that he can remember that can actually be pointed to in his actual citation. Mm-hmm. So he can blame it on the citation. He remembers those two events. All the other events, total amnesia, doesn't remember it, and then he uses a new tactic. Instead of him telling firsthand, stories about what he did, he says, "Well, people tell me I took out 7. Well, people say I killed 21." And he changes his tactics, so he's very wily. But it just shows you once again, as the story has marched on, he's allowed people to take it and run with it. And what's interesting about Medal of Honor recipients is a lot of them are never questioned. When they get that medal around their neck, they become demigods, if you will. And nobody questions it. And that's not how I work with my getting back to my ADHD and dyslexia. I question my Jewish background and Scottish background, if you will. I question everything. And as I started questioning this, I found multiple things. I mean, he lied about how many children his mother lost in childbirth and when they were young to get sympathy from the crowds. He lies about being with a comrade when he died and makes people cry with it. He made the whole story up. And I could go on and on about just stories that he didn't need to lie about. But the bonsai charge that he took out, he made that up as well. He made up about the 7 pillbox. I mean, 2 to 3 pillboxes on Iwo Jima in one day is nothing to deride. I mean, that was an incredible event. But
Were you criticized? Were you criticized for any of this fact finding?
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, you're in court.
Well, I had a general from Vietnam, a Marine Corps general who got the Medal of Honor from Vietnam tell me, "Don't do this until he dies." I had the Iwo Jima American Association, which I was a member of. I had basically the 2 main leaders of that, one being a general, say, "Don't do it." And I would look at them like, "What are you talking about? What about honor, courage, and commitment? The creeds of the Marine Corps, to be honest with our history, to tell the truth." And so many people who were very brave Marines and very honorable Marines were very dishonorable in many respects. But then I had other guys that were incredibly supportive. Commandant Gray, one of the greatest Marines ever, the 29th Commandant. You had General Zenny, former sitcom commander, support me. Commandant Charles Krulak, who's been phenomenally supportive and saying, "Go forward." And then, as one of our brothers, if you will, John Hoffman, and I hate to put myself at the same level with John Hoffman. He's one of the greatest Marine Corps historians the Marine Corps has produced. He wrote the classic work, Chesty, about Chesty Puller, one of the famous Marines. And when he saw this, he was a colonel as well in the Marine Corps. He's like, "Bryan, you got to tell the truth." And Robert Burrell, Lieutenant Colonel, who wrote Ghost of Iwo Jima, a phenomenal work on the history of Iwo Jima, he also said, "Go forward." So for every negative feedback I got for people saying, "Don't do this," I got probably 5 or 6, "Hey, once they saw the evidence, do it." Now, kind of the same thing with Hitler's Jewish soldiers coming full circle, when Michael Barrowbound and Henry Turner and Raoul Hilberg didn't see the evidence, they're all telling me, "Don't do this. This is ridiculous. You're going to kill yourself academically." Once they saw the evidence, they're like, "Oh my God, this is fascinating. Good on you." Same thing with most Marines that I've talked to that, are field grade officers or flag officers. When they see the evidence and they see what I found out, they're like, "Semper Fi, good on you." I've gotten really great praise. And as the book's been out longer and longer and people have had chances to review it and look at how I footnote things, I've gotten more and more support. And also, I've gotten a lot of people from West Virginia, of all places, who were threatening me. I mean, one West Virginia says, "You better not show your face up around here." And I'm like, "Or what?" Of course, we know what he was threatening.
Right.
But that same person later on, when he looked at my evidence, he came back and he apologized. Good on him.
Good on him.
One breath threatened me with my life, and then the other, saying, "Hey, good on you that you found this out, and I'm going to have to reevaluate how I look at Woody."
That's a man. That's a great. People do need to apologize. And a lot of people do apologize when they're wrong. I just when you get the chance these days. But out of curiosity, where's you mentioned General Krulak? Where's he on his Jewish identity? Isn't he? He's of Jewish
Well,
descent.
this is kind of interesting, and he's been a great mentor. He's been wonderful to me, and he doesn't deny that his grandfather was Jewish, but he doesn't like talking about it at all. He did admit that his paternal grandparents, let's see, no, paternal great grandparents, because it was Krulak's grandparents, not his paternal grandparents, were killed in the Holocaust.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, yeah. So Krulak developed, amphibious warfare. He really knew about the ramp boats like the Higgins boat and helped really push that. And here's the irony: here's this Jewish kid that goes to the Naval Academy, is basically responsible for promoting amphibious warfare to the level that we needed to be able to invade North Africa and southern France and Normandy and all the Pacific. But while he was saving Europe and saving mankind from Nazi Germany by really helping us, this brilliant Victor Krulak, brilliant mind, he couldn't save his own grandparents who were slaughtered by the Nazis. Victor converted before he went to the Naval Academy as a young man, 16 years old. And I think he did it kind of for a front, but his son, Charles Krulak, and his brother, and I think many of their relatives, are very deeply believing Christians. And when I pushed this a little bit with the general, now I was a lieutenant, I'm a historian, Krulak is a commandant. When I pushed it a little bit with him in the emails, because he's been so supportive and helpful, he shot me down pretty quickly. And I realized this is not a subject matter that the general is going to allow me to discuss. And it's a private thing with him. He did
his
give
Jewishness,
me, yeah. So they have not embraced it, since Victor put it away. And at the time when Victor entered the Naval Academy in the 30s, it wasn't a good thing to be of Jewish descent, especially with him being such a peewee shrimp. I mean, he was 5'4". That's why they called him Brute. Well, when he entered the Naval Academy, he was 5'2". He at least grew 2 more inches. He was a midget. So, he wanted to do everything he could to blend in society, be accepted by his brothers. And the way he did that was he converted to Episcopalian.
Same with Mark Clark in the Army.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
He's of Jewish descent on his mom's side. I mean, that's how it is, matrilineal. And he was half Jew. No, I guess you could consider him that. And I think it was common to do that in those days because of career advancement. Maurice Rose, same thing, also a convert. But it's interesting chat. So good. I was gonna make a joke, and I know that you'll appreciate it because the first book that you started writing is about ADHD, and you haven't finished it yet. But look at all the stuff you've done on the. So it totally, your ADHD makes sense, But I do remember though, and this is interesting, and it's a good way to bookend everything. Though I'll talk to you till the cows come home if you want, but. You were on the Oprah show once, weren't you? Or you were supposed to be?
No, I was on Rita Cosby, and I was on Dateline for a whole hour.
But I'm talking about for
Jane Pauley.
But for a certain diet.
I've been on a few morning shows. I don't think I've been on anything that's been mainstream about, the Feingold diet, the all natural diet that I do. And I did it for my kids. We didn't do medication. A lot of people with ADHD, are told by their physicians, or their parents are told by the physician, put them on Ritalin or Adderall and so on. And our kids were told we were told that by the school, Shelton, where they went to, a school for learning disabilities here in Dallas, to put our son on medication, even our daughter, and we refused to do it.
Right.
Because the diet really saved me, all natural diet. What a lot of people don't realize, make a long story short, is when you eat artificial flavors, colors, and preservatives, they mimic neurotransmitters. And people with ADHD and dyslexia, they have sensitive systems. So when they ingest these artificial flavors, it almost like exponentially affects them in their behavior. and it accelerates their hyperactivity.
Yeah.
So my mom was brilliant in putting my whole society on this natural diet for me. So after football games, when everybody had Coca-Cola, I had orange juice. After vacation Bible school, when people had cookies and Kool-Aid, I had, apple juice,
Mhm.
and I had homemade cookies, or I had an apple that my mom had brought. And, at birthday parties, my mom would cook a separate all natural cake for me, and everybody else could eat the junk from Kmart or Target or whatever, with all
Right,
the
right, right.
artificial flavors, colors, and preservatives, and the really red icing and whatnot, which had red dye in it, which is horrible for people. And so that's what really saved me, I believe. And I discussed this in a very extensive chapter in Overcoming Learning Disabilities or Conquering Learning Disabilities. These are the working titles for the book.
Yeah.
And I really do believe for people, because I know you have ADHD as well. I mean,
I don't know about the
a lot of
H.
people, yeah,
I don't know
I
what the
know.
I don't know what the H part, but definitely attention deficit that is medicated. But I'd prefer it if
Yeah.
I wasn't. And I'd prefer it if I could, that's an off-campus conversation that we could have, but
And I talk about this in the book about what I think people like you who with physicians, they naturally gravitate to that, but you got to also look at how physicians are trained.
sure.
They're trained to treat disease and treat problems, and quite often that is with medicine. They're not trained to how lifestyle and diet can really modify people's behavior who are ADHD and dyslexia. And when you look at collective studies, when people have been put on all natural diets who have had problems with ADHD and dyslexia, they have remarkable response. And
Right.
Benjamin Feingold, for those of you who are interested in reading about him, he's the one that came up with these concepts. And as I have had people proofread my book now, they are blown away by the research I'm showing how critical diet is. And we all know this. I mean, Americans in general are digging their graves with their teeth. I mean, we're the fattest nation out there. We have some of the worst health problems when it comes to diet. And they're
Mhm.
finding, like, I think it's 70 to 80% of people could change their lifestyle from their food intake and still be alive.
Yep.
That they're finding that what they're doing with their diets, and sometimes that's smoking, so that's also included in the diet, what they're doing with their diets and how they're ingesting chemicals
Yeah.
is actually bringing about their premature deaths. And so I talk about this very extensively in the new book.
Is it coming out?
I'm hoping it's going to come out here in about 4 to 5 months. There is a
Good.
famous doctor who is an expert on ADHD who actually went to the same school I went to, Phillips
Okay.
Exeter Academy. And I'm waiting, hopefully, for a blurb and a forward from him. And once I get that, Steve, I think I'm off to the races.
Awesome. What's going now? All of these, not including the or including, we'll know that that's out because we'll be able to find it. But all these books on is it all just Amazon and Goodreads, or how are people able to find your book? Your books,
Yeah,
plural.
so I thank you
Yeah.
so much. So my books on World War II and the Holocaust are all found on Amazon.com. And then they can go to my webpage, which is just my name, Bryan Mark Rigg. Bryan with a Y like a Yankee, Mark with a K like in kilo, and in Rigg, Rigg.
Right.
And if they do that, they'll see all my books on my webpage. And then that will link them up to the Amazon pages where they can buy my book.
Any Audible versions?
Yeah, I've done Audible with Flamethrower,
Okay.
and I read it myself.
Good.
My first stab at it.
Awesome.
And I'll be doing an Audible version with Hitler's Jewish Soldiers, and then I will be also doing one with Overcoming Learning Disabilities.
Well, that's great. What about the Lubavitcher Rebbe story?
I plan on doing that as
Right.
well. It's time intensive to do an
Sure.
Audible version of a book, but yeah, I plan on trying to get all my books in an Audible version here soon.
Awesome, man. Well, what's anything new that you're going to be your next project to become obsessed with?
Well, I've worked on this Overcoming Learning Disabilities for a long time. The reason why it's taken me so long to some degree, I was ready to bring it out in 2014, and one big chapter in it was praising my wife for dealing with ADHD, me, and dyslexia and so on. And then I go through a divorce, and through the divorce, people say hateful things when they go through breakups. But the one thing that she said that was a huge burden on her life was having children that I gave ADHD and dyslexia to, and then myself, because I'm just high energy and she's very calm and methodical, and this has just exhausted her. And there's some truth to that. I have to own that as well. But I couldn't write the same book, that has a huge chapter praising her for dealing with this, when then I find out that she didn't like dealing with it. She hated it,
Right.
So I had to rewrite
there's
the book.
A chapter. I mean, I think that would very much help. Look, I went through a divorce as well. I think that you become even more niche, because you could see how that's I'm talking about what I brought to the table that wasn't very good. And I think that has some kind of causal connection in marriage's demise, and can help people. So,
and that's what I've done. What I try to do, and people say I'm very balanced. I own my own problems. I do describe some of the problems that she had. And I say, hey, this is what I think ADHD and dyslexic people need to think about when they're in a relationship. Everybody needs to think about these things, but I really highlight some things I think that we, people with ADD, really need to hone in on. So that book's going to come out within the next 3 or 4 months. Awesome. I've been working on a book for a long time called, right now the working title is God as Hitler. And it's a very jarring title, but what I was shocked by when I studied Nazi Germany is how often Christianity was used not to prevent the killing and the persecution, but to support it. So I started studying about the anti-Semitism in Christianity, talking about Jews being God killers, and that they, are a wayward people, and they don't see that when their Savior comes, and all the anti-Semitic piffle that is even still in Christianity today. And I'm looking at this, I'm like, this doesn't create a better society. And then also, what does Jesus and God in the New Testament say if you don't really, embrace their offer of salvation? Where they're going to send you to hell. It's an Auschwitz without end.
Right.
This is not moral teaching. And so God as Hitler, when he creates an Auschwitz without end, is really an appropriate title. So I'm actually exploring religion, both Judaism and Christianity. I don't mix, I don't pull my punches.
Right.
And I'm talking about how a lot of these concepts do not make for a better society. And we need to be honest about this. I mean, when God goes into Sodom and Gomorrah and he slaughters everybody with a firebombing that's every bit as gruesome as the firebombing of 43 of Hamburg or the Tokyo bombing of March 1945, World War II with B-29s, we have to realize that a lot of people that he slaughtered were children. That's not moral. Or let's say the flood with Noah. There were 1 billion people in the world at that time, which a lot of Christian scholars say that there were. Well, then there has to be at least 150 to maybe 200 million that were children.
Right.
They weren't guilty of anything. So I talk about, if we're going to promote morality by studying the Third Reich and show what's wrong with their ideology, Nazi ideology, Shinto ideology with the Imperial Japanese, we need to also be honest with some other religious tenets that are in the Western tradition that actually supported the Nazis, and really look at it carefully and do our best to eradicate it. Because, a lot of Christians do this today, and a lot of Jews as well. A lot of Jews and Christians are not on the street corner going, in Leviticus chapter 18, it says the slaughter gays. We need to find all the homosexuals and kill them. And when there's a gay pride parade, we need to throw grenades into it. I mean, they're not doing that, although it's mandated in the Bible. So I'm working on that book, and we'll see how that makes me popular, Steve.
Well, no, I was reading the Anthony Beaver book about the Russian descent on Berlin at the end of the war, and there's an interesting story of a young Hitler youth boy walking into a store and actually saying Heil Hitler, and everyone turning around and looking at it. This is 45. Whatever God-like stature Hitler occupied in the minds of these people was certainly kaput,
Yeah.
And there's just so many
But
stories.
it took that reality when
Yep.
there wasn't one brick on top of another one in all the major cities of Germany for people to go, you know what? Hitler was a bad idea. But
Yeah.
it only took a war and us bombing their cities, the smithereens, for them to realize they shouldn't be following this nut job.
Who is was it a Hitler biographer whose approbation that you really sought out? I remember someone else in England that you had mentioned that you had approached. Who's
Well,
Evans?
Yeah,
Richard
Richard
Evans.
Evans. Richard
Yeah.
Evans. Richard Evans was wonderful to me eventually.
Yeah.
He was first. He was my oral examiner at Cambridge, along with Richard Knox from London School of Economics. Wonderful men. They sat down. They hammered me. They told me what was strong, what was weak in my first draft of my PhD, and told me what I needed to do. And you're only allowed 2 chances at Cambridge to get a PhD. If you don't get it the second time, you're done.
Right.
So he gave me a lot of good feedback and a lot of his work that he had actually written, by the way, he wanted me to read, which is fine. I mean, he's a phenomenal scholar, but his insight and his help that he gave me with what I needed to do to make a good PhD and hence a good work of history, Hitler's soldiers, he gave me, and he was a wonderful mentor in that moment. The job that he had being my oral examiner and making sure I knew where were my weaknesses and where were my strengths was phenomenal in taking my book from substandard to an excellent work of history. So I'm indebted to him. Absolutely.
Good, man. Well, I'm thrilled that you came on. Hang on one second and listen, man, thank you so much. Don't go anywhere.
Steve, thank you so much, buddy. I appreciate you.
Thanks.